1 million people have been displaced in 11 days. That is a staggering number that should give us all a lot of pause.
All right, Noor, I'm going to request you to continue staying with us. There's a lot more that we'd like to discuss. But since we're discussing the US president, it's important to highlight that his visit to Israel at this moment of war has been unprecedented. Nowhere in the past you've had a US president visit Israel at such short notice, and that too on such an unplanned note. But on that note, let me also bring you the significance of the US president's visit. There are many hopes pinned on the role of the United States. Will they be able to find a diplomatic solution to the age-old war between Israel and Palestine?
There's no question about the impact America can make. It's the real decision-making here.
There is a need for a peace treaty, a peace solution between Israel and the Palestinians. A peace treaty that will not include Hamas. Hamas should go away, but Israel should strive to end the conflict with the Palestinians.
As an Israeli Jew, of course, I expect to have total support. I don't think that the world is aware enough to the atrocities that happened in Israel.
It's always, nice to see the strong ties that Israel has with the United States, and in a time of crisis, President Biden, coming here to Israel to show solidarity to the situation, and hopefully to bring to a quick solution to this horrible, situation that both sides have been brought into.
Noor, we are all aware of the involvement of Iran. Reports have in fact indicated that there's strong evidence with Israel to prove that Iran did back this attack by Hamas on October 7. But how does the United States work through Iran? Remember, we are discussing this at a time when Iran has been heavily sanctioned by the United States, not to forget that Iran is also supporting proxies like the Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Again, it's a good question. For me, honestly, as someone who advocates, political dialogue and peace, it always amazes me that powers like the United States are far more willing to invest billions of dollars in weapons and moving things around and allowing atrocities to happen, and then funding the reconstruction of those atrocities, and to actually sit down on the table and talk, which is the shorter, more peaceful way to finding a solution to any conflict. And ultimately, peace is made not between friends, but between enemies. And Iran is not going anywhere. It is a huge country that has influence in the region, and the US will have to, at one point, talk to it. In the meantime, what it's doing is meeting misery and destruction on an entire region in order to have a proxy, war with Iran that will, maybe they're thinking, weaken it or make it less likely to demand a higher price for a peace treaty or some sort of dialogue with the Americans. I think it's a misguided policy. It's a very dangerous policy. I understand that Biden has a lot of domestic issues to deal with on this issue, and the Republicans are quite hardline. But truly, I think, in the long term, I just don't see the intelligence or the wisdom in spending all this political will, all this money, and allowing these lives to be lost just to, at the end, sit down again at the table.
Noor, on Wednesday, the Israeli military announced that they are finally ready to provide humanitarian aid on the southern Gaza Strip, that is, of course, at the Egyptian border, where there will be a humanitarian zone that will be created to provide that humanitarian aid. Nonetheless, there's been nothing that's been clearly spelled out. How hopeful are you about this humanitarian aid that's being promised by the Israeli military?
Assistance in, we're going to be looking at a far more devastating humanitarian catastrophe than what is already there. And I would shudder to think that the Americans wouldn't push the Israelis to allow tons and tons of assistance that has been waiting at the border for days now. But, the Israelis bombed the Rafah crossing with Egypt more than once. And so it remains quite ambiguous as to whether the Israelis will allow that assistance in or not.
All right, Noor, we will be discussing how Israel can move forward in this war. But for now, let me also bring you how the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has reacted. Remember, he's been expressing his concern ever since the war between Hamas and Israel broke out. And in the latest, this is also what's been highlighted in terms of the kind of hurdles that the UN is facing in providing humanitarian assistance and providing that humanitarian aid to Gazans. Here's a report.
I am horrified by the hundreds of people killed at Al-Ahli Hospital this same day in Gaza by a strike that I strongly condemned earlier today. I call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to provide sufficient time and space to help realize my two appeals and to ease the epic human suffering we are witnessing. Too many lives and the fate of the entire region hang on the balance.
All right, Noor, let me end with this question. Israel says its aim is to end Hamas's control over Gaza, but will an Israeli military victory over Gaza ensure that? And how crucial is it for Israel to convince Palestinians of their safety under Israeli control? Of course, I'm asking you this question, which may seem a bit nascent because
Wash the population under their control, and it would become docile, and it would stop asking for its freedom. And regardless, a lot of Hamas members and leaders, but that doesn't mean that suddenly the idea of Hamas, the following of Hamas will suddenly disappear, just as it didn't mean that the idea of Fatah and other Palestinian factions disappeared when Israel carried out similar assaults on Palestinians elsewhere in its 75 years of torment against the Palestinians.
All right, Noor, it was a pleasure to have you here on the show. Thank you so much for sharing those precious inputs with us. We do hope you stay safe. And with that, let me also bring you some important developments. Remember, the US president being in Israel today has been a very critical turning point in this entire war. US has been very vocal in terms of its support to Israel. Here's bringing you that press conference that was addressed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu along with US President Joe Biden.
I've seen your support every day in the depth and breadth of cooperation that we have had since the beginning of this war. A level of cooperation that is truly unprecedented in the history of the great alliance between our two nations. We see that support in your steadfast commitment to provide Israel with the tools we need to defend ourselves. We see that support in the clear message you've sent our enemies not to test our resolve, and in the two American carrier battle groups that you sent to the region to back up those words with action. But above all, Mr. President, the world sees that support in the moral clarity that you have demonstrated from the moment Israel was attacked. Hamas kidnapped women, children, elderly, Holocaust survivors. I know you share our outrage on this, and I know you share our determination to bring these people back. On October 7th, Hamas murdered 1,400 Israelis, maybe more. This is in a country of fewer than 10 million people. This would be equivalent to over 50,000 Americans murdered in a single day. That's 29 11s. That is why October 7th is another day that will live in infamy. Mr. President, you rightly said that Hamas is worse than ISIS. The German chancellor who visited here yesterday said that Hamas were the new Nazis. You're both right. Mr. President, for the people of Israel, there's only one thing better than having a true friend like you standing with Israel, and that is having you standing in Israel. Your visit here is the first visit of an American president in Israel at a time of war. It is deeply, deeply moving.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much. Look, folks, I wanted to be here today for a simple reason. I wanted the people of Israel the people of the world to know where the United States stands. I've had my great Secretary of State here. He's been here for a lot, but I wanted to personally come and make that clear. Terrorist group Hamas has slaughtered, as has been pointed out, over 1,300 people. And it's not hyperbole, it suggests slaughtered. And including 31 Americans as part of that. And they've taken scores of people hostage, including children. You said, imagine what those children hiding from Hamas were thinking. It's beyond my comprehension to be able to imagine what they're thinking. Beyond my comprehension. They're committed evils that and atrocities that make ISIS look somewhat more rational. You know, Americans are grieving with you. They really are. Israel, as they respond to these attacks, it seems to me that have to continue to ensure that you have what you need to defend yourselves. And we're going to make sure that occurs, as you know. And we have to also bear in mind that Hamas does not represent all the Palestinian people. And it has brought them only suffering. I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you. But there's a lot of people out there not sure. So we've got to overcome a lot of things. And it also means encouraging life-saving capacity to help the Palestinians who are innocent, caught in the middle of this. Israel has a value set like the United States does and other democracies. And they're looking to see what we're going to do. So, Mr. Prime Minister, I'm very happy to be back in Israel with you. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to having a thorough discussion about where everybody goes from here.
A very warm welcome. You're watching News 18 Global. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Shock, outrage and anguish was how the world reacted when the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza was struck late on Tuesday night. The attack, while on one side has left over 500 Palestinian civilians, mostly women and children, dead. A major back and forth has now erupted between Gazan authorities and the Israeli Defense Forces over who takes responsibility for this devastating attack on the Gazan hospital. The IDF has asserted that the strike resulted from Palestinian Hamas rockets gone awry, misfiring and tragically hitting the hospital. From IDF's spokesperson right up to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, all of Israeli authorities now insist that they possess confirmed evidence pointing to a misfired Palestinian rocket as the cause of this catastrophe. And in response, the US President Joe Biden has expressed his outrage over the incident while showing outright support to the Israeli government. Meanwhile, Hamas has claimed that this was an air-to-ground strike and they don't have in their possession weaponry which can cause such kind of widespread damage to a multi-story building. But Israel has denied all these claims. The situation is dire and all eyes are on delicate diplomacy at play. The latest turn of events, however, are a somber reminder of the urgent need for a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, one that prioritizes human lives and dignity above all else. In the meantime, let me also play out all the reactions that have come in from both Israel and the Palestinian side.
I can confirm that an analysis of the IDF operational systems indicates that a barrage of rockets was fired by terrorists in Gaza, passing in close proximity to the Al-Ahli al-Ma'adi hospital in Gaza at the time it was hit. Intelligence from few sources that we have in our hands indicates that the Islamic Jihad is responsible for the failed rocket launch which hit the hospital in Gaza. I repeat, this is the responsibility of Islamic Jihad that killed innocents in the hospital in Gaza.
First of all, Israel is very grateful for all the international solidarity that we've been receiving, including from the good people of India. The world understands that Hamas is ISIS. Hamas is worse than ISIS. The atrocities, the stories that are coming to light now of how Hamas invaded and tied children together and set them aflame, burned whole families alive, are shocking the conscience of the world. And global leaders have been very clear that Israel